Hello and welcome to Creating Equity in STEM, a LinkedIn Live audio series presented by CPASS Foundation featuring conversations with distinguished professionals in the STEM and STEAM fields. By exposing and educating Black and Brown students on the educational pathways and career opportunities STEM and STEAM have to offer, CPASS Foundation leadership and partners create a trusted pipeline to activate more schools, families, and communities to decide to engage more people to choose science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine STEM degrees. I'm Ginger Birkenbeuel, brand advisor, writer, and host of this conversation for the CPASS Foundation. Today, for part of our series on LinkedIn, we're having a vibrant conversation with Todd Jackson. Todd Jackson Jr. is an engineer with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in Los Angeles County, California, where he serves as deputy project manager. We will learn about Todd Jackson's incredible STEM journey from preschool to college, and also gain his insights into what we can do to ensure there are more Black and Brown students in the pipeline to STEM careers. Then we need to understand strategies for how to best help Black and Brown graduates find and earn opportunities at NASA. Thank you for joining us today. This conversation will not be recorded on LinkedIn, but I will have content to share post-conversation on our YouTube channel, which is at CPASS Foundation, and here on LinkedIn, as well as our Instagram channel on CPASS Foundation. On behalf of the CPASS Foundation, formerly the Chicago Area Health and Medical Careers Program, I want to take a moment and thank all of our program and strategic partners, donors, key stakeholders in the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus who've supported our mission at the CPASS Foundation. If you or your company are interested in supporting the CPASS Foundation's mission and scholars, please go to cpassfoundation.org/invest to learn how to give. So let's get started. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I am so grateful that you're joining us today. I have to just give a little backstory. I was invited to cover the NASA launch of Crew 8, the Crew 8 mission this past year, and CPASS Foundation graciously allowed me to use their name as I was representing the foundation at the launch, and I happened to meet Todd Jackson when I was looking outside over the balcony, looking at the launch pad, waiting for the rocket to go up. And I was thinking to myself, wow, there's not very many African American people out here right now at NASA. I wonder who this gentleman is. And I went up and started talking to him, and lo and behold, I found out that he's an amazing engineer for NASA. And it was such a chance and wonderful opportunity to meet you, because I just thought, wow, wouldn't it be a dream if Todd came on CPASS Foundation and we could learn more about his journey to NASA? And here you are. So thank you so much for saying yes to us, Todd. We are really grateful. So I want to say, first off the bat, we really do need to get more Black people in space, bottom line. So I want to understand a little bit more about your current role at NASA and what exactly is the desired impact you hope to make there?
Thank you for that excellent question and introduction. It really was serendipitous when we met. I know, certainly I didn't expect for it to unfold the way it has, but I'm glad it did. I am a deputy project manager for a project called Shamrock, and where I work at the Armstrong Flight Research Center out in the Mojave Desert of California, we are helping to develop an aircraft that is supposed to perform supersonic flights over land. And the point of this is to conduct research about what happens when an aircraft flies supersonically over land. What is the noise effect? How does that affect the community? And how can we make it better so that in the future, for the industry and for the FAA that regulates the industry, these aircraft can be built, mass-produced, commercialized, and you'll be able to fly from LA to Chicago, or from Chicago to LA, or LA to DC or New York supersonically, and cut that destination or arrival time in half or greater. My job as a deputy project manager is to make sure that the team that's developing these systems to help test the aircraft and develop the aircraft itself have the resources they need to be successful. So not necessarily a space focus right now, but at the end of the month, I will be going on a detail or rotational assignment to work on space payloads. So I will be helping to send things into space. So NASA's more than just space, but we do a lot of space stuff. We do a lot of cool things, and I'm excited from going to the supersonic aircraft to now actually working on some space stuff and hopefully getting involved with the launcher team.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Do you have any overarching goals or impact that you want to make at NASA, or are you more focused on, your day-to-day role? And that's a lot probably already.
That is a great question. So there is a lot to learn every day working as a project manager. A lot of problems, conflicts come up, and you have to be able to deal with those very quickly in order to make sure the team can stay focused and do what they need to do to get the mission done. So always a lot to learn, but I've started to see myself, and really it's been that way for the past decade or so, as someone who can develop a vision and help an organization such as NASA grow into the future. So where I want to go eventually is to the top. And the way to do that within NASA and the civil service in general is to become what's called a senior executive. So that is my goal. That is my 5 to 10 year goal, is to make that transition into senior leadership and help the agency shape the vision and its strategic goals for the future. And I'm helping to build that foundation now in my current role, and by expanding and going into things that I necessarily don't have a lot of experience with, such as the space payload detail, and using that to understand more of what the agency does, getting that big picture, 50,000 foot view, as we like to say in the industry, in order to increase my knowledge and, of course, make me a better candidate and help prepare myself for when I eventually do step into a senior executive role.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. Can you share a little bit about your background? It seems like you are really inspired and motivated, and I'm wondering, where did you grow up, and how did you find your way to engineering in general?
Also a good question. People ask me where I'm from. I say I'm really from nowhere. I'm a military brat. My father was in the Air Force, so I've moved around a lot. But I claim Arizona because that's where I've lived the longest. So I am from Chandler, Arizona, and when we talk about how I got the goals or how I got the passion for the industry, my father was in the Air Force, worked on the flight line. I'd see planes. We'd go to pick him up at whatever base we were on, see the planes going by, give them thumbs up, and I'd have my parents. It's somewhat embarrassing to talk about now because it just seems kind of abnormal, but my parents always talk about when I was younger, I would make them read me a military aircraft dictionary with pictures of the planes and the stats of the planes, and they said that was one of my favorite things to do before I went to bed. So you couple that with Top Gun coming out, and I always thought when I was a kid that that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Maverick. I wanted to fly the F-14, which is the main aircraft in the original Top Gun. It makes a cameo appearance in the latest Top Gun movie. And I thought that was all I was going to do. And I as a kid, I had all the airplane books, all the airplane models. Used to make a cockpit out of my bed sheet and pillows. So it was in my blood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you wanted to be a fighter pilot?
Yes, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And as I was growing up, of course, this is the early 90s into the 2000s. The information technology age, computer age, my interest started to drift more towards computers because I also thought they were really cool. I liked playing video games and I liked taking things apart. So learning how to build computers, how to program on them, how to do things with the internet, that became my focus. Now, of course, I still had the passion for aviation, but it took a bit of a back burner. And when I graduated from high school and went to college, and really, college was the only choice for me. That was what my parents were telling me. Like, you will go to college, you will get a degree. I thought to myself, I really like computers. I'm going to do computer science, or I'll do computer engineering. So I started off in computer engineering, and you mentioned the aversion to math. I also had that aversion. Math was easy for me in high school, so I just assumed that it was going to be easy for me throughout the rest of my life. And then I started taking college level calculus and calculus 2 and then calculus 3, multivariable calculus. And it was just a different world. It was a different level of challenge. And of course, with college, a different level of responsibility. I still wanted to play video games and work on computers. And it didn't occur to me that maybe that would have to take a back burner to focus on my studies because I was struggling. I just assumed that because I was struggling, maybe it wasn't for me. So I went through a period of not having the confidence necessarily. And of course, just focusing on computers, I wasn't building that network, building that support network, people who could help me achieve my goals and people who could help me with the math courses and all of my difficult courses. So I initially just gave up. I went from major to major, and finally my mother decided to intervene and said, you need to stop this nonsense. You've always liked aircraft and aviation. Why don't you become an aerospace engineer? And that was an aha moment for me. And I decided, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I changed my major to aerospace engineering, and of course, things got a lot more difficult because it's a difficult major. I had to retake some of my math courses and really focus and study. But this time, I had the resolve, and she also gave me a few more hints. She's like, well, why don't you join some clubs, like the National Society of Black Engineers? And I thought to myself, okay, I don't really know anybody in the National Society of Black Engineers, but I'll do it. I remember going to the first meeting being very nervous, but again, it was cool. It was community. It was family. So I was able to build that support network up with people who looked like me and who were also struggling. And then I joined a few other clubs, including the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And I noticed that a lot of people in these clubs were also in my classes, so I was able to make that bond outside of the classroom with them, and then we became study partners, we became friends, and that community aspect kept coming in, and it's what allowed me to flourish and to focus to get the coursework done so that I can graduate with that degree. But initially, I thought it was going to be a cakewalk. I thought I knew this stuff in high school. It's going to be easy now. And when it wasn't, I thought to myself, well, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe engineering isn't for me. Maybe I'll just never understand that, which I think can be common among students and young people. It's just, I was able to refocus because people wouldn't let me leave the fight, essentially, especially my moms. Of course, my pops was an engineer, and he was back there supporting me as well, giving me that tough love. But it was really my mom staying on me and telling me, hey, you can do this. These are where these are where your interests lie. This is what you should focus on. That's really what got the ball rolling.
Wow. That's I have so many questions now that I didn't have planned in my on my notes, and I just want to start off with 3 questions. So one, you mentioned video games, and we're in a gamer culture right now, especially with boys, and especially since the pandemic. I'm really curious about your relationship with games and how you feel about gaming in the academic space, and if you feel that gaming and, young boys especially in particular that are gaming, if that's a potential entry point. Two, I also want to understand, you talked a lot about the clubs you joined. What school were you at? I don't think you mentioned that earlier. And when you were in these clubs, was it your first sort of exposure to, diverse communities because your classes were mostly white students, or what was that like? That's so there's two separate, completely different questions, but I do think the first one's important because what I'm seeing with young, especially young boys now, there's a lot of gaming going on, and I'm trying to find out how do we convert that to STEM education. Okay, so those are two different questions.
Absolutely. No, video games, they're an integral part of the culture now. I would say when I was growing up, video games were viewed as something that only children did, and it was a sign of immaturity. And now it's kind of changed where it's mainstream. And I think they are great tools. They've been used as recruitment tools before. When I was younger, the Army put out a game called America's Army, where essentially you were doing basic training. It was one of those first-person shooting games, and they were taking you through basic training. So video games are very good ways to introduce subject matter to an audience. And there is a direct correlation with video games and simulations. I think about what I saw when I worked for the Navy prior to coming to NASA, and what I see at NASA. When we want to train pilots on a particular maneuver, aircraft, or flight profile, and they don't necessarily have the familiarity or the currency they need to fly that successfully or routinely or the way we want, we put them in simulators. And what is the simulator? It's a mock-up of a cockpit with all of the controls and buttons that they need, with terrain projected from a video monitor and computer software running on it. Essentially a video game. Now, it is a highly accurate, highly detailed video game and environment, but that's really what it is. And you talk about we talk about the VR headsets and the VR experience. That's bringing the common person much more closer to what we do in the aviation or engineering world with simulations, because now you're creating that reality, and that helps the brain pick up on the cues on what you need to do once you're out operating in the real world. So I think there's a very good synergy and influence of entertainment with engineering and what can be used to train what they call the human system. So I really go into detail with that because when I worked for the Navy, I worked in human systems engineering, and I learned a lot about how people interact with the world around them. And again, video games are one of those tools, one of those olfactory tools that people can use to better understand the world around them. Now, there is a negative aspect of it, right? I played video games too much when I was in high school, and that flowed over to college, where a different level of focus and discipline was needed. And essentially my brain was looking for the dopamine hit of playing a video game, and of course playing it well, to the point where I was ignoring my studies. So there has to be a limitation and understanding of when it's cool, when you can do things, and that comes from knowing yourself and setting boundaries of when you can have that entertainment, get that dopamine hit from playing video games, and when you need focus. But at the same time, again, everything in moderation. You can use those video games and that experience to help you with interacting with the world around you, maybe understanding technology a little bit better, and of course working on those fine motor skills.
That's really helpful. So I actually want to move forward a little bit and talk about your professional experience. How did your career evolve, and how did you actually end up working at NASA? Because NASA's huge. I mean, when I was out there, covering the Crew 8 launch to the International Space Station, to watch Dr. Jeanette Epps, she's the first Black woman on a long mission. I got to meet astronaut Leland Melvin. They were just incredible people, and the whole entire environment was astonishing. But I also was like, this place is big. Where is the door? How do you find the door? Who do you talk to? So I really would like to know briefly, where you started and how you actually got there.
Absolutely. So you mentioned, I forgot to mention my alma mater. I graduated from the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. So shout out to all the Wildcats out there, bear down. When I graduated, I got a job, and actually I was very concerned that I wasn't going to get a job because my GPA wasn't the greatest, at a place called Honeywell Aerospace, working on gas turbine engines, so jet engines. And that was a bit intimidating for me. College gives you a very general understanding of the discipline and of your major, but where you really learn how to think critically and solve problems and become a good engineer is when you go into industry or go to work your job, because they're going to teach you what you need to know to do your job. I worked at Honeywell Aerospace doing project engineering, which is a bit more technical focus than what I do now. And then there had always been a goal of mine to move to the East Coast. And NASA was also in the back of my mind. But when we're young, there are a lot of different competing goals. I also thought that maybe I wanted to become a fighter pilot. And in fact, again, when I talk about the influence of my parents, one Christmas, they gave me a voucher for flight training and said, "You've been talking about doing this all the time. Now it's time to put up or shut up and go to flight training." So I was doing flight training while also working as an engineer. Some mornings I would wake up early, go fly, and then drive off to work. And I started to think, maybe this fighter pilot thing, joining the military, maybe this goal is closer than I thought it was. And I just so happened, when we talk about how you and I met, I went to an air show and I met a pilot, not actually a pilot, a flight doctor, someone who flew but didn't necessarily fly planes, who looked like me. And I went and I talked to him, and he told me about what I could do, what paths I could take in order to join the military. And he mentioned that he would help me. So that's when I thought, you know what, this is really possible. I think I'm going to do it. And I remember I flew an aircraft by myself. And when I came down, I said, that's it. This is it. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try to get a pilot slot and join the military. Well, I had a heart attack. Literally, the day after I flew an aircraft by myself. Woke up in the hospital, thought to myself, oh, maybe I was in a training accident. I've already joined the military. My dad was there. He told me, no, you're just 5 minutes away from where you stayed. Your roommate saved your life. He didn't panic when you passed out. He resuscitated you, and that's how you got here.
Wow.
So, yes. So
that was unexpected. I wasn't expecting you to say this.
What was that?
I wasn't expecting this part of the story. This is incredible.
Oh, yeah. No, it's always a surprise. It was a surprise to me. So I had to think about what I was going to do. I thought this was just a minor bump, but it turns out that if you have a major medical condition, they're not going to give you a pilot's license. So that was devastating to me. And I went back and I mourned a bit for that lost opportunity. And then I just got back on the train and I thought to myself, okay, well, I can't become a pilot, but I've always thought about working for NASA. And I didn't necessarily know how to get to NASA at that point, but I thought to myself, I'm going to put all of my effort into doing that. And the way I thought I was going to do that was by becoming a flight test engineer. So I had a friend of mine who worked for what's called NAVAIR, the U.S. Navy Aircraft Systems Department, and he got me on in a place called Patuxent River, Maryland. So I moved out to Maryland and started doing what I originally had done at Honeywell, working propulsion, and then I moved over to human systems engineering, which blew my mind. I learned a lot about like optical sciences, how humans perceive things, and aircraft lighting, as well as the human element in flying, the psychological toll that doing a task in a cramped space will take on you, the decisions, the way people make decisions. It was eye-opening. And before I left the Navy, I also got to become a flight test engineer and wear the uniform during the training, wear a flight suit during training. I got to sit in the cockpit of a fighter jet and test a lot of cool things. So, I felt at peace. Like doing that allowed me to come to terms with that opportunity that I could not pursue. And I thought to myself, now I'm ready. I've got the experience. I didn't have the grades, but I've got the experience. I could definitely work at NASA. So I applied to a few positions. I actually had a job offer, but I didn't take it because I wanted to stay on the East Coast. And I got a job with the FAA doing safety engineer, essentially. And I learned a lot about what the FAA does and how it keeps people safe while they're flying and how it makes sure that the industry is creating products and systems that are safe for people to fly on and to use for flight. Again, that bug working for NASA just kept gnawing at me. I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to try again. And I did. I applied for actually the same position that I got when I was working for the Navy. But this time I wasn't selected, which was a bit devastating, but risk mitigation is really big in engineering. So I mitigated that risk essentially by applying to an Air Force detachment that was co-located with the NASA center that I wanted to go to. So I got the job with the Air Force. I moved out there. Wasn't really expecting much necessarily other than I was going to use the opportunity to get my master's also from the University of Arizona in optical sciences, something that I'm still working on. And once I had my master's degree and I had that experience, I was just going to make a jump over into the Armstrong Flight Research Center, which was right down the street from where I was working. Well, it so happens when we talk about having that support network, I had cultivated a relationship with a very good mentor of mine who is now the deputy center director. And we had never met each other, but I contacted her when I was working for the Navy and I was trying to decide whether I was going to work for the FAA or work for NASA. And we kept the relationship going. I applied for a job at that NASA center, not necessarily having all of the experience that I needed to have, but certainly having relevant experience and that base of critical thinking skills and knowing how to solve problems. And of course, from the great mentors I had at the Navy, being able to speak to people and interview well and put a good resume together, I got the interview and I told her about it. And one of the first things she said is, make sure you list me as a reference, which I didn't necessarily know the significance because I didn't know how big of a deal and how large of influence she had. But after I finished the interview and the interview went well and they asked me for references, I mentioned her name. And the first thing the interviewer, who became my boss, said was, "Oh, yes, I know her very well." And then she told me, yes, he called me afterwards, and she was like, I pumped you up. And sure enough, I got the job. So it wasn't something that I necessarily expected. I just I took the opportunity and said, we'll see where it goes from here. And that is what finally got my foot in the door. And again, it was much sooner than I expected because I was enjoying what I was doing with the Air Force. I was working on UAS and optical sensors, and that's really where I saw my career going, and I still do see my career going at some point. And I was fine. Like, I had that 5-year plan to get the master's and then jump over to NASA. But the goal essentially moved itself to the left, and it was right there before me. And I said, okay, I got to walk through the door, as one of my mentors told me. I just got to walk through the door, and I got to take the opportunity.
I love this. I love this.
That's how I got there. That's how I got to NASA. Yes.
I love it because, again, you mentioned critical thinking skills in the very beginning, and I think that's definitely required in the high sciences, which you're a part of. So I'm just really I just love your story. I think it's so inspiring, and it's just way more than I ever dreamed. It's interesting when you were networking through to get to NASA. It sounds like this is really before the penetration of social media, and I do have a question around social media. So I manage the brand experience and the thought leadership and reputation of CPASS Foundation online on multiple platforms. And one of the things I notice is we as Black people and brown people as well, especially those of us that are in, the high sciences, they're really not tapping social media to the extent that I think they should be. And I wonder what your thoughts are on having an online presence when you are in these fields and you're a person of color, if that is something that you believe is more required now than it used to be. I'm even thinking about how NASA is going about recruiting now. I mean, they are going all in online, every single possible platform you can think of, some platforms that most of us aren't even using. I mean, they have an incredible presence on Tumblr, right? So I'm just sort of curious what you think about the difference between when you were navigating through the engineering field and the STEM field compared to what you think is required now, because you're already there. But what about the young people? Right. How can they do this? Should they be using social media? Should they be having a LinkedIn profile? And I don't want this whole conversation to turn into that, but it is something that I think is important for our communities, because with the presence of artificial intelligence and automation and the autonomous agents that are coming or that are actually already here, the avatars, the appropriation of our name, image, and likeness online, we're starting to lose control of our cultural conversation. It's starting to happen, and I wonder what you thought about what do we need to do as Black and brown people to get ourselves out there?
That's a great question. And I was speaking to one of my coworkers about that. We're about the same age, in our early 40s, and we talked about what it was like when we were growing up. Computers were starting to come into the mainstream. The internet was still young and burgeoning, and we were really the first generation that we didn't necessarily have the technology with us when we were really young, but certainly as we were growing into our formative years, it was there for us, and we're used to it. But I think for kids now, it is an integral part of their life. As soon as they come out the womb, essentially, they've got all of this fresh stimuli, smartphones, computer entertainment that they readily access, and it is just essentially an extension of themselves. Whereas for me, I view it as a tool. And it's a tool for information, a tool for reaching out to people. And that's what it was for me, and that's how I used it to find my mentor slash sponsor, Lori Grindle at NASA. She was part of you mentioned that NASA has a very good PR team, has a very good outreach team. She was part of a series of YouTube videos where women at NASA were talking about their roles and how they got to NASA and what they thought the future outlook of NASA was. And at the time, NASA had a public-facing employee directory. And so, of course, I also worked for the government. It was easy for me to get access to that public-facing directory. And I used the skills that I developed as a millennial working with computers to find that directory, find Lori, and I just sent her an email. I sent her an email from my Navy account. She responded, much to my surprise. And that's where we developed the relationship. And again, it was about 5 to 6 years before I actually met her in person. And even that was by chance initially.
Interesting.
So the internet and social media, I guess YouTube kind of fell in that realm, or was starting to transform itself to become more of a social media tool. Helped me find my mentor. And more than that, I got to see someone who looked like me, who was in a position of influence and prominence, who was willing to reach back and help me get to where I wanted to be. And that was a integral part of my story. So I think that what NASA does and what the other federal government agencies, because it's more than just NASA, do very well is utilize social media to recruit and to reach out to people. And they do a great job of representing, showing people of diverse backgrounds and diverse stories. And that should really help. I think that really helps the kids see that it is possible. It's possible for them to do these things. It's possible for them to be successful and work at NASA. But again, the representation that's a critical part of it. You have to see, there have to be people, a diverse set of people who represent the diaspora and all the rich cultures and experiences that make up this great country. And that is what will help draw people in. That's what will help draw minorities, women into the STEM fields, is seeing people who look like them, talk about their experiences, and of course, making them accessible. Like that public-facing NASA directory no longer exists anymore.
Of course not.
But,
I was thinking when you said that, I'm like, where is this directory? Because I'd like to get my hands on it. I love all this because, basically you're validating what I'm suggesting is that, because we have so many tools, right, to use, that networking should be happening online, and you should have a strong presence. You need to put your face out there. You have to tell your stories. You can't be afraid of social media and storytelling. You can't be afraid to talk about your history and be authentic in your message, because this is the way to bring more people forward that look like us into these fields. In-person networking is certainly critical and important, and we're definitely hoping, to get you here to Illinois in June to talk with our students in person. But there is a way to extend our representation so that we can have more control over our narratives before the narrative controls us through artificial intelligence. And that actually, I did want to, so I appreciate your networking conversation. So I wanted to ask you, because let me just level set the room. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining our conversation. And
also another U of A Black alum.
I like it. Thank you for joining the conversation. We're here talking with Todd Jackson Jr. On behalf of CPASS Foundation to really understand his journey, so we can get more Black and brown people into STEM fields. So welcome. And if you have a question, I am going to be opening the floor in a few minutes. But you can raise your hand, and there's also a react button at the bottom if you want to leave a heart or a clap or a thumbs up. Unfortunately, they don't have black and brown hands and thumbs, which really frustrates me about LinkedIn. Like, we got the yellow hands everywhere, the yellow Lego color. So I'm like, oh my God, when are we gonna get the black hands?
Yeah, we need to do a software update.
They need to do something, I'm telling you. Okay, so I want to just, jump into disparity a little bit. Why, especially not only in the academic space, but in the workforce as well, why aren't there more students of color choosing STEM as a career, right? I feel like there's only so much you can do and CPASS Foundation can do, right? I mean, where is the government gone? Like, is everybody just giving up on us? I really, I'm unhappy about all this stuff happening with diversity, equity, inclusion. I don't know if you read recently, but MIT is now eliminating their DEI statement from all their documents. So what do we need to do here? Like, why aren't there more black and brown people choosing this as a career like you have?
So what I'll say is, I think there are more. It's definitely, it's not, the floodgates aren't opening necessarily, and it's more of a trickle. But the biggest thing for me when I was struggling and deciding if engineering was something that I wanted to stick with was, again, building that community. And a big part of that was the National Society of Black Engineers, which at this point, I think has at least over 10,000 engineers, black engineers, and it's a student-run organization. So you've got students and professionals in what's called the PCI, Pre-College Initiative. And that experience, going to a NSBE conference, seeing all the people who looked like me, who were in the STEM fields and having the same struggles or successes, really helped make me feel like I wasn't alone. Because at the U of A, I definitely was one of one or one of two, probably the only black person in my classes, but thankfully, of course, I also was in the Society of Hispanic Engineers, Professional Engineers. And so I had a lot of Latinx classmates to help balance it out, but still very homogenous class sizes, or very homogenous classes. And NSBE allowed me to have a base. So when I was struggling in those classes, I could talk to somebody who was black, who had taken a previous class similar to that, and maybe they could help me with the homework, or they could be like, oh yeah, this is what the professor does on the tests. You need to be ready for this. You need to study for this. And it was that support network. Mm-hmm. So you've got organizations such as NSBE that, of course, hold conferences every year. They hold activities. They're active on the campuses. They do outreach. And then I was very fortunate as a professional to stay in NSBE, but also I had a bigger support base. Wasn't necessarily engineering, but a support base of alums called the U of A Black Alumni that also welcomed me in and helped me as a professional, and allowed me to grow both professionally and personally with some of the friendships I made, and of course the community outreach events. So outreach is a big part of it.
Can I ask you? Let me ask you. Does NASA, like in the reverse, right? Does NASA jump into those organizations, looking for talent? Because
yes,
I'm just even thinking about programs that CPASS Foundation puts together. We're here, available, and we're very active. We have an amazing team with CPASS Foundation between Tracy and Asia Lawrence, who's down below, and listening in. We're available and ready and ready to host, NASA. But, what is NASA doing to get to us, though, and to get to these organizations you're talking to? Are they doing it?
Great question. So NASA has what's called OSTEM, or a STEM department, where they help develop and create curriculums for high school students and high school and pre-college students, essentially, to get that love and familiarity with STEM. And of course, get that familiarity with NASA. But on a federal level, the Biden administration has released what's called Executive Order 13985, which addresses exactly what we're talking about. Addresses the gap in STEM in Black and brown communities, and lays out a foundation and essentially an edict for federal agencies to increase the diversity in the federal workforce. And NASA's response to that is something called the NASA Equity Action Plan. And that action plan talks about exactly what you and I are speaking about, increasing NASA's presence at HBCUs and HSIs, increasing NASA's presence at the STEM organizations that are targeted to Black and brown communities such as NSBE and SHIP. So it wasn't, I don't think it was codified before, but now there's federal legislation that points NASA in the direction and essentially mandates that the agency do more to recruit diverse talent and to make sure that talent can thrive. So there are a number of different mechanisms. Of course, me and you reaching out was more happenstance, but there's what's called the STEM Gateway now, where organizations, 501(c)(3)s or nonprofit organizations can sign up and request NASA speakers or NASA curriculums to be sent their way. And of course, I'm going to give you that link and send you that information after this call. So it wasn't, I would say initially, it was always something that was on the forefront. NASA has had a lot of different, a lot of diversity initiatives, and has always done well promoting and recognizing its diverse path. Of course, you think about Katherine Johnson and Mary Jackson, and of course, all of our Black and brown astronauts. But the workforce is extremely diverse, and they do a great job of highlighting that and promoting that. And social media is one of those tools. But now with this executive order, there's a federal mandate that says, okay, this is what you have to do. Here are your targets, and we need to see action from you. And I believe NASA has responded in kind, and you only see it intensify as the years go by, hopefully.
That's excellent information. Thank you so much for sharing. So I want to ask a question around artificial intelligence before I open the floor. So this is a large conversation that we can have again later. So I don't want to end the whole call with this answer, as I do want to let people ask their own question. Artificial intelligence. So are you using AI in your day job? Like what is happening right now with this artificial intelligence? It feels like it's taking over. I feel like a lot of really smart people are now realizing they're not very smart after all, now that AI is here. I think young people don't even realize that, they're dealing with a lot of autonomous agents in their, even in their gaming. You know what I mean? They're interacting with these things. Maybe they don't even know. But what about you? What is your relationship with artificial intelligence in your day job? Do you have something going on?
The extent that I've used artificial intelligence in this role is just using ChatGPT to refine my searches. Right?
Oh wow!
That's a great
wow.
That's a great point. Right? We talk about disruptive technology and how it becomes the narrative, and the concerns and the excitement around it. I think about the turn of the century with the automobile. Again, I'm sure people thought that was going to be the end of the world. I think about the information age, GPS coming online. Anytime a new technology threatens to disrupt our way of life, there's always a panic. But what I'll say, and I guess I'll flip it back on you, Ginger, is you've got children, correct?
Mm-hmm. 3.
Yes. I don't have children, but of course I've worked with them before on these STEM projects and in my capacity as an engineer and in my volunteer activities. And children are very valuable, are they not? They're sponges, essentially, right? You've got to give them stimuli, and then of course you have to ground them, give them a foundation and a way to go. And the hope is, of course, that they'll become great human beings and that they'll also have a set of morals and ethics that they will abide by. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So not to say that there's a one-to-one comparison on AI and small children, but AIs have to be trained, right? You have to feed them information, whether that's images or documents or what have you, for whatever you want them to do. So the AI is only going to be as ethical as we want it to be, right? So people and the people who are developing the AI and the people who are utilizing it, they have to keep that in mind, and then they also have to put pressure and advocacy to the leadership, the people who are developing these AIs, and of course the government, which will regulate the AI, to say we don't want the AI to do this. We want it to act ethically, and that's a whole other question.
Right.
It's like, I don't want the AI to have my personally identifiable information. I don't even want it to search for that. So you have to make sure that the algorithm and the way the AI is trained is such that it isn't looking for, it's not trying to find personal information on specific people.
Yeah.
And you have to set up the boundaries and those limits, just like you would have to do in a human relationship.
Right.
And then you also have to think ethically. If I want autonomous cars, then I also have to think about how I want that AI to operate the cars. And one of the big questions, and it's unfortunately it's played out in the real world, is what's safer? Is it safer for a autonomous car and its passengers to keep driving when it sees an obstacle, even if that obstacle is human? Or is it safe for the people in the car? Well, then you have to flip it and think, what about the person outside the car? What is their safety? And how should the AI view that ethical challenge?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think I know what you and I would do. We would swerve and try to avoid hitting that obstacle. But if the AI has been trained if the AI has been trained to prioritize the safety of the occupants of the vehicle, then what's the most logical choice? You see what I'm saying? So
exactly.
We have to make sure that our ethics and our morals and what we accept as a society are baked into that AI.
Yeah. When I was at NASA, visiting to watch the Crew 8 launch, I did ask a lot of the engineers questions about how they're using artificial intelligence, and NASA is a safety first organization. So and they all pretty much in concert said, humans are pretty much the only reliable, mechanism for us to, and I'm not quoting anyone, this is just my interpretation. Humans are the only reliable mechanism to ensure the safety of our astronauts. So that to me says a lot. Human discretion, human critical thinking takes precedence over any programming that can take place, at least at the moment, right now. Like maybe in the future there'll be AGI and they can start, they can start managing, the launches. You know what I mean? I don't know. It sounds too scary to me. If I swerve, I might swerve into a crowd of 10 people versus, swerving into a pole. But I want to ask you one more question, and then I really want to, we're actually at time. If you have a few more minutes, I'd love to ask you the question.
I do.
Okay, great. I would like to know, and so with Dr. Martin and Tracy, are you going to be working on Artemis 2? Are you going to have any role in that whatsoever? The launch, and what is, launch the second launch to the moon, right?
Yes. So Artemis has a big window, so I can never say never. But in the short term, no, I don't see it. Though if they put one of the payloads that I'll be working for this rotational assignment onto the aircraft, then I can write you back and say yes. In fact, I did happen to have a hand in Artemis 2.
Do you want to work on it?
No. Yeah, it would be cool. Again, I don't have a lot of experience on the space side of things. I've always done aeronautics, the aircraft, which is my real passion.
Okay.
And of course, Artemis is it is the signature project and program for the agency right now. So any way to attach yourself to something like that and to get the experience of working on a large team, working towards a common goal of launching a rocket and then seeing the rocket launch, right? You think about your experience at Kennedy and how amazing it was to meet everybody and to finally get the rocket launched. Well, magnify that by tenfold for the people who are actually working on it and had a hand in it and were able to see the systems and see their system grow from their mind to the whiteboard to a blueprint to finally a realized system and then integrated onto the rocket, and the rocket goes into space.
Wow.
That's a huge feeling of accomplishment. So anytime you can get that, if you can chase that feeling, of course, you want it to happen. So I wouldn't rule it out because again, there are years. It's a project that is going to play out over several years, but right now I can't say that I will have a hand in it, but I definitely would love to see it.
Wow. I think this is fantastic. So, Todd, it's been fantastic talking to you. I want to make sure if Dr. Martin or Tracy or Asia or Courtney have a question for Todd, happy to open the floor if you want to say something.
So thank you, Jen and Todd. This has been a phenomenal conversation, and thank you both for participating in our podcast, as well as hopefully we see you here in Chicago. And I appreciate all the love from the former Pac-12. You are coming into the Big Ten countries, so Chris and I will have a different discussion when you get here. But I wanted you, if you could just quickly continue your conversation that we had in the green room, where you were challenging, in a good way, gender that everyone can be taught critical thinking skills. Why is that not an emphasis as we see in K through 12, in your opinion?
So I think that a lot of K through 12 curriculums are based towards testing and teaching kids how to test well, and of course specific tests, right, that are known and that have a lot of data and history on them. And those tests we talk about like the SAT. I don't know what Illinois' standardized test is, but certainly in Arizona we had a standardized test that we were benchmarked against. And it's just rote memorization, right? What is this formula and how do I apply it? Or read this passage and then write a paragraph on it. You aren't necessarily teaching students what to do when things go wrong, right? When my car breaks down and I've got a flat tire and I need to get to work in 10 minutes, what do I do? Right? You're not teaching them that, or you're not teaching them, hey, you're a lead on a project and things aren't going well. One of your team members gets sick or one of your components fails during a test. How do you handle that, right? Or you've got to automate this project or this program so that instead of you writing an email, the program writes an email based on certain inputs, right? That's not necessarily being taught in K through 12 because they don't they don't have the time. They've got to teach to that test. They've got to teach to that rigid curriculum. So I read a very good book called, I believe it was called Finnish Lessons, about a decade ago. It just talks about how they do things in Scandinavia, where the curriculum is much more tailored to the student and the student's interests and their strengths. And they're basically measured on not a timeline where they've got to complete a bunch of things and then test and then move on, but a set of standards developed by the student and the teacher saying, oh, okay, have you weren't necessarily doing well with algebra. So we're going to hold you back a little bit and help you get the what you need to get up to speed with algebra, but we'll move you along in English, right? So it's much more fluid as opposed to what we see in a lot of American public schools, where the curriculum is very rigid and you've got to take the test. You've got to learn the material for the test, take the test, pass the test, and then move up. It's more focused on the individual and what that individual needs to succeed. So I think that's a problem. Of course, you've got certain schools like magnet schools, some charter schools, and then private schools that don't necessarily have to adhere to a state legislated curriculum, and they allow for that more freedom. I just think that should be opened up to everybody, because all children, we all learn at different levels and at different speeds. And if you can get that personalization, that might make the difference between someone who has an interest in engineering actually persevering and becoming an engineer or working in the STEM field versus that person saying, oh, well, it's just not for me. I can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Welcome, Darnell, to our conversation with Todd Jackson, engineer at NASA. We actually are going a little bit over. So if you, welcome. So glad to see you here. If you have a question for Todd, that would be fantastic. Would anyone else like to ask Todd a question? Dr. Martin, do you have another question for Todd, or?
Yeah, if you could, and one of the things that struck me in Todd, your story, I don't want to sit here and put generalities out there and say that your story is pretty much like everyone else's story, because your story was just like my story, that it was that mentor that was the difference that got me over the hump in my graduate work. So one of the things, did you when you're talking, do you kind of really stress and talk with students and scholars that it's really, as they're thinking about their higher educational careers, do you emphasize the role of the mentor or mentee, the role of the mentor, particularly as they're going after their master's or a doctoral degree?
Yes, absolutely. Mentors are vital. And I didn't understand that when I was in college, because I was antisocial and I didn't really want to talk to people. Like I had a lot of hangups. I was concerned that people wouldn't think I was smart or that it wasn't cut out for me. And of course, there was some empirical evidence, right? We all have people who doubt us based on how we look or what they see from us. But when I went into industry, it was really people. It was people who looked like me, and then people who just saw my potential, essentially, who knew what it was like to be a minority in the industry, or just saw my passion for aviation and wanted to help, who came to me and said, we're here to help, you need to utilize us. So that is the approach that I take now. Of course, for myself, I'm proactive now. I know how to speak. I know how to communicate with people. I'm not afraid to reach out. But I think for a lot of students and younger people, there is that bit of apprehension, especially when it comes to face-to-face, interactions, right? Talking via email or talking via social media, that's easy, but that face-to-face interaction where you're in front of the person, it's a bit different. So it's one, the student being willing and receiving, or the person, the protege being willing and receiving of that mentor, and then the mentor being active and taking an interest, because that's what it is. It's a relationship. So I think that it's twofold. The student has to, or the protege has to realize what they want and how that mentor can help them get there. And then the mentor has to realize that their job is to advocate and, of course, stay in touch, because that's what all of my mentors have done. They've made sure to check in on me if they don't hear from me. It's, hey, how are you doing? Give me a call. In fact, that reminds me, I need to give one of my mentors a call because I haven't spoken to him in a long time. And it's that reciprocal relationship. But it really is, many times the onus is on the person who needs the help to admit that they need the help and to attempt to reach out. But I've been fortunate in the organizations that I've worked for. There's been essentially a portal, a web program that allows people to look for mentors. And then, of course, I've been active in organizations. So you get to meet people from different walks of life who you see who can possibly help you to get to where you are, and you can develop a relationship from there. But yeah, it all falls on the individual who needs the help, but the organizations can help cultivate that and make people comfortable to reach out and ask for help by bringing people in to talk, and of course making sure that those people are willing to be mentors and to take on proteges. And then there are other methods such as social media or web-based solutions that allow people to seek mentors and match up with mentors. So that's what I've seen in my career, and that's what I think that's worked best for me, and I've seen it work well for other people as well.
Yeah, thank you, Todd, and thank you for this great conversation today.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, on behalf of the CPASS Foundation, we are so grateful that you were here, Todd. Thank you, Darnell, Asia, and Courtney for joining in the conversation. I will be having some post snippets of this conversation to be sharing over the next month. And this is absolutely fantastic. And Todd, we're really looking forward to hosting you here in Illinois in the coming weeks. We'll have another conversation offline with Dr. Martin about that. But you are wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story, and everybody that joined in. If you'd like to follow CPASS Foundation, please check us out at cpassfoundation.org. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Also look for us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And we will see you next time. Thank you.